My daughter's fiancé Victor looked at me with a mix of disdain and superiority, his voice dripping with condescension, as he said, "Frankly, old man, beggars like you have no place at our wedding. This will be an elite event, and you'll just ruin the atmosphere." The words were a slap to the face, and my hands trembled as I tried to process them. The crystal chandelier above us seemed to dim as his words hung in the air, and I felt every eye in the oakwood grill turned toward us. The wealthy diners at the neighboring tables leaning in, whispering, watching our family drama unfold. Victor sat there in his $3,000 suit, arm possessively draped around my daughter's shoulders, his gold watch glinting in the light as he gestured dismissively at my worn button-down shirt and simple khakis. I had driven 90 minutes through the traffic of Manhattan to meet him, to connect with the man Loretta had chosen, and here he was, mocking me, publicly humiliating me, as if my life, my love for my daughter, meant nothing. Loretta's voice, barely a whisper, responded, "Maybe Victor has a point." Her words stung worse than anything Victor had said, hitting me harder than the insults ever could. "This will be a very refined celebration," she continued, not meeting my eyes, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the enormous diamond on her finger. She went on to explain that the guest list was mostly Victor's business associates and their families, people of a certain level of society, and my heart sank further. The daughter I had raised, the one who used to proudly say I was the smartest daddy in the world, now couldn't even look at me, agreeing that I wasn't worthy to be at her wedding. Victor snapped his fingers at a passing waiter and ordered more expensive champagne, all while his eyes remained on me, like I was a nuisance in his world, a world I didn't belong in. I was nothing more than a relic, a reminder of a past Loretta seemed to want to forget. The waiter hurried away, eager to escape the tension, but I noticed how the restaurant staff now avoided our table, their forced smiles betraying their discomfort with the situation. My own daughter, who I had worked every extra shift for, who I had sacrificed so much for, was now embarrassed of me. "Daddy, please don't make this harder than it has to be," Loretta finally said, meeting my eyes for the first time, but her gaze was cold, filled with embarrassment. Her eyes no longer held the love I had once known. They were filled with shame of me. "I understand," I said quietly, my voice somehow steady despite the storm inside me. I stood up, my movements mechanical, the words Victor had said echoing in my head. As I walked toward the exit, Victor's voice carried across the restaurant, his smug satisfaction in his words. "See how easy that was? Sometimes you just have to be direct with people like that." The words stung like salt in an open wound, and I stepped out of the restaurant into the cool spring air, feeling the weight of his contempt pressing down on me. My hands shook so violently that I couldn't get the key into the ignition of my old pickup truck. As I sat there, the restaurant's lights shining through the rearview mirror, I watched Victor and Loretta continue their meal, now animated and carefree, their previous discomfort forgotten. I felt the distance between us, growing, felt the loss of my daughter, who had chosen money over the love and sacrifices I had made for her. I drove out of the lot, the city's glittering wealth mocking me through my windshield, surrounded by Ferraris, Mercedes, and BMWs, their drivers probably wondering what poor fool was driving such an old truck. As I merged into the traffic, I couldn't help but replay Victor's cruel words, the realization dawning on me that this wasn't an accident. He had planned this, coached Loretta on exactly what to say. His treatment of me was no mere oversight. It was deliberate, a calculated attempt to humiliate me in front of the very people Loretta had chosen to impress. The drive up I-95 North felt longer than usual, the familiar signs of the Bronx and Westchester County flashing past me as I drove deeper into my isolation. At a rest stop near White Plains, I pulled over, my hands shaking again. I fumbled for my wallet, pulling out a photo of Mary and me at Loretta's college graduation. We were so proud, so hopeful, the three of us standing together as a family. "Mary, what did I do wrong?" I whispered to the photo, my voice barely audible. The memory of Loretta, as an 8-year-old crying because other kids called our car ugly, hit me like a physical blow. I had worked 3 extra shifts that month, just to buy her new clothes, to make sure she never felt ashamed again. I had done everything for her, and now, she had chosen money, choosing Victor's wealth over the love I had given her for 30 years. "Family stands together, sweetheart," Mary had said when Loretta was little. "Money comes and goes, but family is forever." But now, Loretta had chosen Victor's wealth over her father's love. The pain in my chest was unbearable as I thought about the Christmas when Loretta visited for just 2 hours. Distracted, checking her phone, making excuses about important people she had to see, I had thought it was just part of growing up, part of building her own life, but now I saw it for what it was, her slowly pulling away, ashamed of me and everything I stood for. The hurt was still there, but something else began to form inside me, something colder, more purposeful. If Loretta and Victor wanted to judge people by their money, maybe it was time they learned about real wealth. I had been playing a part, hiding my true worth for their benefit, but now it was time to show them what real money looked like. I hadn't slept that night. The next morning, I found myself pacing the kitchen, sipping my 3rd cup of coffee, my mind working through the plan. The house felt different now, quieter, emptier. The family photos on the mantel, the memories of better times, felt like a lie. Loretta had chosen money over everything I had given her. I walked down to the basement, each step feeling heavier than the last, and as I reached the hidden safe, I felt a strange sense of finality. My fingers found the combination, and the heavy door swung open. Inside I found the evidence of my real fortune, $17 million in investments, accumulated over the years, starting with a $50,000 investment in Apple stock in 1995. The calculation of how much it had grown over the years was staggering. I pulled out the documents for Tesla, Apple, and several other investments, each worth millions today. The money had been there all along, hidden away, while my daughter called me a beggar. But now, it was time to use it. I called my broker, James, and instructed him to make changes to Loretta's inheritance. The trust fund I had set up for her future would now be revised. If she wanted to judge people by their wealth, she would learn what real money looked like. I spent the next few weeks preparing for the ultimate lesson. On June 15th, the day of the wedding, I stepped into the Rolls-Royce Phantom I had purchased, the car that cost more than anything Loretta had ever imagined. I wore a custom-tailored Brooks Brothers suit, a Rolex, and carried myself with the confidence of a man who knew his worth. As I arrived at the grand estate, I saw the shocked looks on the faces of the guests. Loretta's expression changed from confusion to recognition as she saw me walking toward her. Victor's face turned pale as he tried to process what was happening. I walked to the microphone and, in front of 200 guests, revealed the truth about my wealth, my investments, and the trust fund I had set up for Loretta. The reaction was immediate: gasps, whispers, disbelief. Loretta's champagne glass shattered in her hands as the truth hit her. She had chosen money, and now she was losing it all. The trust fund I had planned for her was now gone, redirected to educational charities. Victor's face contorted with panic and rage as he tried to deny it all, but the guests were already judging him. They were no longer looking at me with curiosity. They were looking at him with disdain. As I left the ballroom, I felt a strange satisfaction. Loretta and Victor had learned a valuable lesson about wealth and dignity. The guests continued to stare as I walked toward the Rolls-Royce, knowing that I had shown them all what true wealth was. My phone buzzed with texts, but I turned it off without looking. I had made my point. The modest man who had been humiliated months ago was gone, replaced by a man who had shown that true wealth wasn't about money. It was about money. It was about dignity, respect, and knowing your own worth. As the Rolls-Royce glided smoothly down the long driveway of the grand estate, I could see the guests still gathered on the terrace, their murmurs of disbelief continuing to reverberate in the crisp evening air. The weight of their judgment seemed to hang over Victor and Loretta, as the once polished facade they had worked so hard to build began to crumble. It was a moment of truth, one they had never expected, and as I sat back in the comfort of the Phantom watching the luxury cars of the guests gradually disappear in the rearview mirror, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settling within me. They had underestimated me completely. For years, they had dismissed me as nothing more than a relic of a past life, a man whose worth was measured by appearances, by how much money he had or didn't have. But today, I had shown them exactly what wealth truly meant. As I looked out at the serene Connecticut countryside passing by, I found myself reflecting on the lessons I had learned over the years. Money might buy status, but it could never buy integrity, love, or the kind of respect that comes from knowing one's true worth. Loretta and Victor had thought their wealth would protect them, that it would shield them from the consequences of their choices, but in the end, it had done nothing but expose their moral bankruptcy. I had spent so many years trying to be a good father, trying to provide for Loretta, to give her everything she needed, all while teaching her the values of love, family, and hard work. But somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of those values. Money had become her measure of success, and Victor had only furthered her belief that wealth was the ultimate source of happiness. It was a painful realization, but in a way, I was grateful for the clarity it brought. I had done everything I could for her. Now, it was time to let go. I couldn't change the choices she had made, but I could certainly show her that true wealth wasn't measured by what you had, but by who you were. I continued to drive north, the city's lights fading in the distance as I made my way to the quiet solitude of my home. The events of the day had been exhausting, emotionally draining, but also strangely freeing. I felt a sense of finality, like I had closed a chapter I had never expected to end this way. The wedding was over, the damage done, but there was something liberating about it all. I had walked into that ballroom as a father who had been humiliated, and I had walked out as someone who had reclaimed his dignity, his worth, and his sense of self. As I arrived home, I parked the Rolls-Royce in the driveway and sat for a moment, the silence of my small house enveloping me. I thought about Loretta's face, the shock in her eyes when she realized what I had done. I thought about Victor's panicked expression, the realization that his world of flashy cars and designer suits had been exposed for what it truly was, shallow and fleeting. I could still hear Loretta's voice in my mind, pleading for me to help her with the $30,000. As if nothing had happened, as if the humiliation of the restaurant hadn't taken place just hours earlier. I knew now that no amount of money, no grand gesture, would ever change who she had become. The thought was painful, but it was also a release. I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. I had shown all of them, exactly who I was. I stood up from the car, and as I entered the house, I couldn't help but smile a little, not from joy, but from a deep sense of knowing. I had finally learned to stop chasing the approval of people who would never see my worth. I had reclaimed my own dignity, and that was worth more than any amount of money. The rest of the evening was quiet. I spent the time reflecting, not with anger, but with a calm resolve that I had done the right thing. I had given Loretta everything I could, but it was clear she was not the person I thought she was anymore. The wedding gift I had planned for her, the trust fund, was gone. But I wasn't angry about it. No. Instead, I was proud of the man I had become. Proud of the lessons I had taught myself. Proud of the choices I had made. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down in the living room, my mind wandering to the days ahead. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for certain. I was finally free. As the night wore on, and I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that life had a way of teaching you the most important lessons at the most unexpected times. Loretta had chosen money, and in doing so, she had lost something far more valuable. But I had gained something I had never expected: peace, respect, and the knowledge that my worth was not determined by the size of my bank account or the opinions of others. I had made my own path, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and I glanced at it. A text from Loretta? It was brief. "I'm sorry, Dad. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment before setting the phone down. There was no rush. I had learned the hard way that some conversations didn't need to happen immediately. I had made my peace, and if Loretta truly wanted to rebuild our relationship, it would have to come on my terms, not hers. The evening wore on, and I found myself no longer thinking about the wedding, about the betrayal, or the drama of the day. Instead, I focused on the quiet comfort of my home, the familiarity of my worn furniture, and the peacefulness of my simple life. I had found something far more valuable than anything Victor or Loretta could ever offer me: peace of mind, respect, and the knowledge that I didn't need anyone else's approval to be content. And with that realization, I closed my eyes, finally able to rest, knowing that I had done the right thing, and that whatever came next, I would face it with the strength and dignity I had worked so hard to reclaim. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. The days that followed the wedding were strange. At first I felt the weight of the chaos settling in, but gradually, something shifted within me. I was no longer angry. The sting of betrayal from Loretta and Victor still burned, but the bitterness was no longer the dominant force in my heart. It was replaced by something far more powerful: clarity. A deep, unwavering clarity that I had been waiting for my whole life. For so many years, I had defined myself through the lens of others, through the expectations of a society that placed value on things like wealth, status, and material success. But now, I understood that none of those things mattered. Not in the way I had once believed. My daughter, the child I had poured everything into, had become a part of that system. A system that valued money over love, appearances over substance. But I had risen above it. The pain of her rejection was real, yes, but it no longer held the power to define me. I could feel it, this quiet, growing strength within me. The lessons I had learned were not just about wealth or revenge. They were about something deeper, about the power of self-respect, the importance of standing firm in your truth, and the ability to walk away from toxic relationships, even when they were with your own flesh and blood. The first few nights after the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had transpired. There was the joy of having made my point, of having shown Victor and Loretta what real wealth looked like, but there was also the pain of what it had cost me. My relationship with my daughter was shattered, and there was no turning back. The things I had worked for all these years, the life I had built, had been swept away in a moment. But as the days passed, I realized something. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe it was time for both of us to move on. It became clear that Loretta had chosen her path, and I had to let her walk it. No matter how painful it was, no matter how much I wished things had turned out differently, I had to accept it. And so, I did. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't try to salvage a relationship that had been so fundamentally broken by her choices. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Meanwhile, I kept going, building my life, piece by piece, brick by brick. I had a lot to think about, a lot to plan. The $17 million in investments was a game changer, but I wasn't interested in living a flashy life. I didn't need a mansion, or a yacht, or 100 cars. What I wanted now was peace, and maybe even the opportunity to help others who had been in my position, people who had been written off, dismissed, and made to feel less than because of their financial status. As I thought about this, I realized I had something that no one could take from me: a purpose, a true sense of purpose. I spent the next few weeks revisiting my investments, checking on them, making sure everything was in order. but I also took the time to research charity organizations, particularly those focused on education. I had long believed that education was the key to unlocking a better future for anyone, no matter their background. It was the great equalizer, and I wanted to make sure that my wealth went towards something that could truly make a difference. I contacted several organizations, speaking with them about the possibility of setting up a scholarship fund for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. I wanted to give others the opportunity I never had the opportunity to succeed without being judged for where they came from. It wasn't long before I started working on the details. I contacted my lawyer, James Thompson, to help me set up the trust fund, and I began allocating funds for various educational initiatives. The joy I felt while working on this project was immeasurable. For the first time in years, I felt like I was contributing to something meaningful, something that mattered. But I wasn't just doing this out of guilt or obligation. I was doing it because I had learned the true value of wealth, and it wasn't in the things you could buy or the people who bowed to you. It was in what you could give, what you could build, and how you could leave a positive impact on the world. As I spent my days working on the scholarship fund, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. I knew I was on the right path, the path that would lead me to the legacy I had always wanted, one of giving, of teaching others what I had learned the hard way. But despite the satisfaction of my newfound purpose, I couldn't shake the memory of Loretta's face, the desperation in her voice as she tried to manipulate me into giving her money for her wedding. It hurt deeply. I had spent so many years being the best father I could be, and yet, all it took was one person, one moment of weakness, to destroy it all. Still, I wasn't going to let that define me. I was going to create something better, something that no amount of money could destroy. The weeks went by, and life continued. I made more changes to my investments, made more plans for the future, and started spending more time with the people who mattered, friends, old colleagues, and people who had shown me true friendship over the years. One afternoon, as I sat in my study, reviewing paperwork for the scholarship fund, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Loretta. My heart skipped a beat as I answered the phone, my mind racing. "Dad, I am sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just... I got caught up in everything, in Victor's world, and I forgot who I was." Her words, though sincere, didn't carry the same weight they once would have. The damage had been done, and no apology could undo the years of hurt, the years of sacrifice that I had made for her, only to have it thrown back in my face. "Loretta," I said softly, "I appreciate your apology, but I can't forget what happened. I can't forget the choices you made." She fell silent for a moment, and I could hear the soft sobs on the other end of the line. "I understand, Dad, I really do," she whispered. "But please know that I never stopped loving you." I paused, thinking carefully. "I know you love me, Loretta, but love isn't enough. Not when the foundation is built on something as shallow as money." And with that, I made my decision. I wasn't going to hold on to the past. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me or make me feel guilty for setting boundaries. My life was moving forward, and if she wanted to be a part of it, she would have to earn that place, just like everyone else. The phone call ended with a promise to talk again soon, but I wasn't sure what that meant. I knew things had changed, and they couldn't go back to the way they were. But I also knew that I had done the best I could. I had raised her, loved her, and sacrificed for her. If she couldn't see that, then maybe it was time for me to move on. I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. It had been a hard road, filled with pain and betrayal. But it had also been a road that had led me to a deeper understanding of myself, of what really mattered in life. Money was not the answer, nor was it the key to happiness. It was respect, love, and the courage to be true to yourself, no matter what the world said. And with that, I turned my attention back to my work, knowing that I was doing something worthwhile, something that would leave a lasting impact, even if my own daughter couldn't see it. Days turned into weeks, and as I settled deeper into my new life, I began to realize that the sense of peace I had been searching for was no longer just a fleeting feeling, but a permanent fixture within me. The rage that had once consumed me, the desire to punish Loretta, to get revenge on Victor Zoli, faded into something far more potent: clarity. The clarity that, while their betrayal had stung, I had far more control over my life than I ever realized. I had the power to shape my future, and no one, least of all Loretta or Victor, had the right to define me. The investments, the luxury of the Rolls-Royce, and the suits were only the outward symbols of a deeper transformation, one that couldn't be measured in money or status. I had learned, in the most painful of ways, that true wealth came not from what you had, but from what you gave, not just to others, but to yourself. I began to focus more on the charity work I had initiated. The scholarship fund, which had been set up with my $17 million fortune, was a beacon of hope for children who had been dismissed by society. Kids from broken homes, struggling in poor neighborhoods, these were the ones who needed help. They needed an opportunity to succeed, just like I had worked so hard for Loretta. But Loretta, with her shallow perspective, could never have understood this. As I spent more time with the foundation, I felt a sense of fulfillment that went far beyond the validation of wealth, I saw the smiles on the faces of children who now had a chance to attend college, to live their dreams, to break the cycle of poverty. And that, I realized, was the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Not a legacy of revenge, not one of bitterness or regret, but one of hope, opportunity, and love. But that didn't mean I had forgotten about what happened. The pain of Loretta's words, her rejection, was still there. Deep in my chest, though it no longer consumed me. The memory of her choosing money over me, over family, over the values we had once shared, still haunted me at times. Especially when I thought about how she used to be, how she would run into my arms after school, how she would brag to her friends about her smart daddy who worked so hard to provide for her. Now, that girl was gone, and in her place was someone who had chosen Victor's wealth and influence over her own father. I tried not to dwell on it. Instead, I focused on the present, on the children whose lives I was helping to change, on the impact I was having on the world. I threw myself into my work, and it gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't known in years. Yet despite this growing sense of fulfillment, there were moments when I would sit alone in my study, a glass of bourbon in my hand, and think about Loretta. I thought about how much I had sacrificed for her, how many hours I had worked, how many dreams I had put on hold, just so she could have the life I thought she deserved. And now, all of that had been thrown away. But it wasn't just the money that hurt. It was the way she had dismissed me. It was the way she had thrown away everything we had shared. She had chosen Victor, someone who valued appearances, who saw people as pawns to be manipulated. And worse, she had sided with him in the most painful way possible by rejecting me, her father, and the family that had always been there for her. It felt like a deep wound, one that I couldn't fully heal, no matter how much I tried to focus on my charity work or the growing success of my investments. Still, I knew I couldn't change her. And maybe, maybe, that was the lesson I needed to learn. Not everyone is going to value the same things you do. Not everyone is going to see the world the way you do. Loretta had made her choices, and I had to let her live with them. The thought was freeing. In its own way, for the first time, I stopped holding on to the idea of what we had been. I stopped trying to fix it, to make it the way it was. Instead, I focused on building the life I wanted for myself. I focused on the people who truly appreciated me, the friends who had stood by me, the colleagues who respected me, the people whose lives I was impacting with my foundation. These were the relationships that mattered, and these were the people who would always have a place in my life. I didn't need Loretta's approval. I didn't need Victor's. I had already proven my worth, not to them, but to myself. I had done something truly meaningful with my life, something far more valuable than the shallow judgments of people who only cared about appearances. And so, I began to move on. Loretta's calls became less frequent, and I didn't answer them. When she tried to reach out through text messages, I didn't respond. She had chosen her path, and it was time for me to choose mine. It wasn't about holding grudges. It was about accepting the reality of the situation. The girl I had once known was gone, replaced by someone who had made it clear that money was her god. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Transformation within me was complete. I no longer needed to prove myself to anyone. I no longer needed to seek validation or approval. I had discovered something far more important, the peace that comes with knowing your own worth, the freedom that comes with not being bound by the expectations of others. As I sat in the quiet of my home, reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized that I had come out of this experience stronger, more resilient, and more certain of who I was than I had ever been before. I was no longer the man who had been humiliated, the man who had been rejected. I was a man who had reclaimed his dignity, who had learned the hard way that wealth wasn't everything. It was family, respect, love, and integrity that truly mattered. And with that realization, came a sense of peace that I had never known before. My investments continued to grow. My charity continued to thrive. And my life, while different, was exactly the way it was meant to be. Loretta had chosen her life, and I had chosen mine. And no matter what happened next, I knew that I had made the right decision for me. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, but I didn't pick it up. There was no need. I had already said everything I needed to say. The people who mattered, the people who had always been there for me, were the ones I focused on, and the rest, they could be left behind. My life was mine to live, and I was finally free. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the street below. The world was still moving, still turning, but for the first time, I felt at peace. With my place in it, I had shown the world, and most importantly, I had shown myself, what it meant to truly be wealthy. And it wasn't about the money. It was about the choices I made, the people I loved, and the life I had built. As I moved forward, the days blurred into one another, but the peace I had found within myself remained steadfast. The transformation that had begun with the humiliation at the restaurant had blossomed into something unrecognizable to the man I had been before, someone dependent on others' perceptions, someone who had allowed his identity to be defined by his financial standing. The man I had become was one who had let go of the need to be seen a certain way, to prove himself to people who, the grand scheme of things, held no true power over him. My days became filled with a calm, deliberate purpose, working on the charity initiatives I had set up, helping children from underprivileged backgrounds get the education they deserved, and meeting with like-minded individuals who shared the same vision. It was fulfilling work, and it reminded me that the true measure of a life well lived was not the wealth you amassed, but the impact you had on others, especially those who had the least. Still, there were moments when I would think back on the phone call with Loretta, how her voice had trembled, how desperately she had tried to make things right after all that had transpired. Yet, the truth was that I couldn't just forgive her. It wasn't because I didn't love her, because I did deeply, but I had come to understand that love could not be used as a currency for manipulation, and while I still held a place for her in my heart, it would never be the same. I had given her everything, my time, my love, my labor, and, in the end, I had been cast aside when it was no longer convenient. The realization stung, but it also gave me clarity. It became clear that I needed to focus on what was truly important in my life, and that was not just the money I had amassed or the possessions I owned, but the relationships that were based on respect, mutual love, and trust. I continued to manage my investments, quietly letting the wealth I had built grow. But with every passing day, I cared less about the money itself and more about the legacy I could create with it. I reached out to more foundations, more schools, and more organizations focused on empowering those who had been left behind. I poured resources into scholarships, mentorship programs, and grants for students who, like I had been at one time, found themselves judged for their backgrounds. The work brought me joy. It reminded me of the sense of purpose I had once felt when I was struggling, when I had worked so hard to give Loretta a better life, to ensure she would never feel like an outsider. What surprised me most, though, was how the events of that day had shaped the way I saw the world. I had always prided myself on my ability to provide, to give everything I had to my family, to make sacrifices without expecting anything in return. But now, I saw things differently. I saw that true generosity wasn't about what you could give in terms of material wealth, but in terms of time, love, and the willingness to let others be who they were without judgment. I realized that Loretta, for all her faults, was still my daughter, and while I would never forget the way she had treated me, I could not abandon her entirely. She had been swept up in a world of affluence, surrounded by people who valued wealth over integrity, and I couldn't blame her entirely for the choices she had made. She had learned from Victor, from the very people who had judged me, and though I didn't agree with her choices, I understood them. The truth was, Loretta wasn't the only one who had been changed by her environment. I had to. The man I had become, the man who had walked away from that wedding, was no longer just a father fighting for the love of his daughter. He was someone who had rediscovered his own value and was determined to show others that true wealth came from within. Over the next few months, Loretta continued to try to reach out. Her messages became more frequent, her tone more remorseful. I read each one, but I never responded. I knew that deep down, she still wanted something from me, my approval, my forgiveness, and most of all, my money. But I had learned that forgiveness couldn't be bought with cash, and my approval was not something that could be bartered for. I couldn't be manipulated by guilt anymore. Eventually, Loretta stopped trying to contact me. I heard through mutual friends that she and Victor had started planning their life together. They had married, and she had adopted a lifestyle of luxury that suited Victor's world. While I couldn't say I was happy about the choices she had made, I was finally at peace with them. I didn't need to be part of their life anymore. I had my own life to live. I focused on the foundation and the work I was doing to help children who had no other means of support. I poured my energy into this cause, working tirelessly to expand it and reach more people. And as the months passed, I found a sense of fulfillment that I had never experienced before. My life wasn't defined by Loretta's choices or by Victor's wealth. It was defined by the work I was doing, by the people I was helping, and by the sense of purpose that had become my new reality. I stopped thinking about the past. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently or why things had turned out the way they did. I accepted it all, the good and because it had shaped me into the person I was today, and I was proud of who I had become. One evening, while I was out for a walk, I ran into an old friend from the past, someone I hadn't seen in years. He looked at me with surprise and admiration. "Leland, you look different," he said, his eyes scanning my appearance. I smiled. I had been wearing the same old clothes, the ones that had once made me feel ashamed of my modest lifestyle, but now, they felt like a badge of honor. "I'm just living my life," I replied. "That's all we can really do, right?" We spent a few minutes catching up, and as I walked away from the conversation, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I had stopped trying to keep up with the world's expectations. I had stopped being ashamed of who I was. I had stopped caring about appearances. And in doing so, I had found a peace I never thought possible. The world continued to change, as it always did. But I knew one thing for certain. I had learned the most important lesson of all. It wasn't about what you had, but who you were. And now, I was free from the chains of judgment, free from the need to prove myself to anyone, and free to live the rest of my life on my own terms. The legacy I would leave behind would not be one of wealth, but of love, integrity, and the courage to choose what was right over what was easy, and In the quiet of my home, as I sat at my desk and reflected on everything that had brought me to this point, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had tested me, but it had also given me the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to find something far more precious than money. True wealth was found in living authentically, in being true to yourself, and in doing what was right, no matter the cost. And that, I realized, was the only kind of wealth that truly mattered. Months went by, and my life slowly found a rhythm of peace that had once seemed impossible to attain. The charity work became my daily focus, and the deep satisfaction I found in helping others overshadowed any lingering regret about the past. It was a sense of fulfillment that money couldn't buy, a richness that no amount of wealth or status could replace. The foundation was thriving, offering scholarships and support to children from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping them navigate through life's obstacles, just as I had once navigated my own. Each time I received a letter or a note from a recipient of the scholarship expressing gratitude for the chance to change their lives, I felt the weight of my decisions lift a little more. I was doing something that mattered, something that would outlive me, and that gave me a sense of purpose that no luxury car, no expensive suit, or even the $17 million in my account could ever replicate. But as my work continued to grow, shadows still occasionally loomed over me. The question that haunted me most was not why she had chosen Victor and his money, but what had become of the little girl who used to hold my hand when she was scared, or curl up beside me to read stories. On quiet evenings, the child I had raised with so much love, the child who once saw me as her hero, had grown into someone who seemed distant and unreachable. Every time I thought of her, it was as if I was reminded of the passing of time, of the days I had spent, thinking I could protect her from the world, only to realize she had embraced the world's coldest values without hesitation. And yet, despite the distance between us, I still found myself wishing, deep down, that things could be different. It wasn't the money that mattered anymore. It was the bond we had once shared, the bond that had been severed by her choices. It was in those moments, when the evening was quiet, and the world outside seemed to fade away, that I realized how much I had longed to restore that connection. But deep inside I knew that the person I was now was no longer the same man who had once hoped for her approval, no longer the man willing to give everything, even his self-respect, to be part of her life. Loretta had made her choice, and while I would always love her, I had come to accept that I could not change who she had become. My life had moved forward. It had to. With or without her, I had a path to follow, one that was filled with purpose and meaning, far beyond the illusions of wealth and status. One day, as I sat at my desk, reviewing more proposals for the scholarship fund, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something about it made me pause. Hesitantly, I picked it up. Dad, it was Loretta. Her voice sounded different, soft, more vulnerable than I had ever heard it before. I am sorry, Dad. I know it's been a while, but I've been thinking about everything, about how I treated you, about what I said, and I want to apologize. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I was wrong. The words hung in the air for a long time, and I just sat there, unsure of how to respond. A part of me wanted to reach out, to embrace her, to tell her that everything was forgiven, but another part of me, the part that had learned so much over the past months, knew that words were just words. They didn't erase the pain of betrayal, and they didn't undo the choices she had made. Loretta, I said, my voice steady but firm, I appreciate your apology. I really do, but I can't pretend like everything is okay. What happened between us? It's not something I can just forget. You chose Victor's world, and you chose to turn your back on the family you had. That's a decision you'll have to live with. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could hear the faintest sobs. I didn't mean to hurt you, Dad. I wanted to be a part of something bigger. I wanted to be accepted. I paused, letting her words sink in. You were always a part of something bigger, Loretta. You were always a part of our family, and I loved you. But you can't buy love with money. You can't buy respect with wealth. That's something I've learned the hard way. She sniffled on the other end. I just wanted to be accepted by Victor's world. But I see now that I've lost the most important thing in my life. I've lost you. You haven't lost me, Loretta, I said softly, but you've lost the man I once was. I've changed. I've learned to value myself, to value what really matters. And I'm no longer the man who would bend over backward to please someone who doesn't appreciate what I've done. We both sat in silence for a moment. I wasn't sure what to feel. Part of me wanted to reach out and help her, but I knew that doing so would only encourage the same patterns. I had to let go. I had to let her walk her own path no matter how much it hurt. Finally, Loretta spoke again, her voice small and uncertain. I don't know what to do, Dad. I don't know how to make it right. You can't make it right, Loretta, I said quietly. All you can do is move forward. And I hope that one day, you'll understand what it means to value family over money. Until then, I have to focus on my work, on the people who need me. There was another long pause, and then she whispered, I'll always love you, Dad. I'm sorry. I know, Loretta, and I'll always love you too. But we can't go back. We can only move forward. I hung up the phone, my heart heavy with the weight of the conversation. It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was the resolution I had accepted. Loretta had made her choices, and I had made mine. I had learned to live without her in my life, to find peace in the things that truly mattered, and that was enough. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of closure. I wasn't looking for reconciliation anymore. I wasn't chasing after a love that had been lost. I was content. And with that, I turned my attention back to the work I had been doing, the lives I had been changing, and the legacy I was building. The foundation, the children, the scholarships, they were my future now. They were my family. And as I looked out the window of my study, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew that I was exactly where I needed to be. Months passed, and as time went on, the impact of the phone call with Loretta slowly faded, but the quiet, almost meditative peace I had found in my life only deepened. Every day I poured myself into the work of my foundation, the scholarship program I had started, helping underprivileged children access education. The sense of fulfillment that came with knowing I was giving these children a chance at a better life, children who had been written off by society, much like I had once been, was a feeling that transcended any material wealth. It was real wealth. It was something real, something grounded in purpose, and it made me feel alive in a way that money or luxury could never provide. The memories of Loretta and Victor, though painful, had become less about revenge and more about learning from the experience. I had come to understand that the most powerful wealth in life was not defined by what you had, but by what you gave away, and how you chose to live your life with integrity. I had stopped yearning for Loretta's approval, stopped wishing that things had been different, and embraced the fact that she had chosen her own path. I couldn't change her, nor could I force her to see the world as I did. She had chosen Victor, his wealth, and his world of appearances over the love and simplicity I had always tried to give her. The realization stung, but it also freed me. Loretta had made her choice, and I had to move forward. My foundation grew, and I found purpose in helping those who had been overlooked by society. Yet, even in the midst of my work, there were moments when I would sit alone, reflecting on what had happened, wondering if Loretta ever thought of me, if she ever regretted the way she had treated me. But deep inside I knew that I had given everything I could. My role as a father had ended, and the relationship I had with Loretta was no longer in my hands. She had moved on, and so had I one day. I received a letter from her. It was short, a few simple lines of apology, expressing regret for the way things had turned out. She acknowledged her mistakes and said that she would always love me, but that she understood the consequences of her choices. I sat with that letter for a long time, the words echoing in my mind, but I didn't rush to respond. I had nothing left to say. What had happened between us couldn't be undone with a few words, no matter how sincere. The pain was no longer raw, but it was still there, a quiet ache that reminded me of the daughter I had lost. But I had learned that forgiveness wasn't about someone else's apology. It was about freeing yourself from the burden of resentment. I realized I no longer needed her approval, her love, or even her forgiveness. The lesson was painful, but it was one I had to learn. I had to let go. I focused on the work that mattered, on the legacy I was creating with my charitable efforts. I had started a new chapter in my life, one that was rich with purpose, even if it wasn't rich with the things I had once thought important. And in time, I found peace. Loretta's choices were her own, but I had learned the most valuable lesson of all. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the love and impact you shared with the world. The phone rang one evening, Loretta's name flashing on the screen, but I didn't answer. There was nothing left to discuss. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. I had learned to live with it. I had found my worth, not in my daughter's love, not in Victor's wealth, but in the work I was doing to change lives, to build something lasting. That was where my focus would stay. Life had tested me, and while it had been painful, it had also shown me what really mattered. I would carry on, continuing to give, continuing to build, continuing to be the man I had become. As the days passed, the past became just that, the past, and all I had left was the future, a future filled with purpose, with people who mattered, and with the quiet joy of knowing that I had done what was right, no matter the cost.